Welcome to Almost Here, Round the Corner Future Technology podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies poised to transform our lives for better or worse are the focus of this podcast. Almost here means these technologies are now here and starting to be used, or just around the corner, from Bitcoin to artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Future Tech podcast. My name is Chris Amsler. Our guest today is Kenneth Goodman with Hercules Tech. Hi, Kenneth. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Kenneth, tell us a little bit more about your background.
Sure. So I did my undergrad in honors mathematics and finished that in 2 years. During my time there, I started researching cryptography a lot with some of my professors there, and got really interested into got math. And while I did my summer internship at Goodman, started researching a little bit more cryptocurrencies. Probably read some article like Bitcoin is dead. I'm like, what is dead? And tried to really learn more. When I started there full time, I'd already been involved in some communities. This was more academic interest rather than investing. Obviously, hindsight, I should have invested. This was in 2015, but did not. And then about a year and a half later, I started investing in cryptocurrencies after being heavily involved with communities, trying to develop, playing around and creating like little blockchains at home on Amazon. And that's really how this whole thing spun out of control. And I've just gone deeper and deeper into this rabbit hole and not even close to coming out.
That's really easy to do, especially with the mania going on around cryptocurrency lately.
Yeah, for sure. I would say I guess looking back 2 or 3 years ago, whenever I mentioned Bitcoin, everyone looked at me like I'm an idiot. And then I would about 3 to 6 months ago, I get maybe 10 or 20 texts a day like, should I buy Bitcoin? Is now the time to buy Bitcoin? Then when Ripple started having that movement, should I buy Ripple? And this is where I started getting a little concerned. There had been a similar run-up at the beginning of 2017, but it was more localized to within the cryptocurrency community. And this had slowly spread to mass media as CNBC, Bloomberg, New York Times, Washington Post, instead of posting once a month, we're now posting multiple times a day articles about cryptocurrencies. And this is when I started to get a little fearful. The technology hadn't changed much, but the price valuations were getting, or market capitalizations were starting to grow very large. I know market capitalization and company valuation aren't like great metrics to use as analogies, but if it's even closely related, we're having coins like Cardano, Tron, etc., having crazy high market capitalizations that are comparable to companies like Twitter, which is probably one of the most used platforms on the planet. And so this is where some of these things scared me. And obviously, I was right in hindsight, but it could have gone up to 30, 40, 50, 60,000 before it stopped. And I think we're still at that point as Bitcoin is in that 8,000 range, where not a lot has changed for a lot of the other coins. But they're still seeing significant appreciation since last year, March time.
Where are you seeing these high market caps right now that may be cause for concern?
Sure. So I view it as what is if like Bitcoin's peak, let's say it completely wins. If crypto wins, let's say, and Bitcoin succeeds way beyond anybody's dreams, it becomes the currency for the entire world. And not only that, we developed some smart contract on top of Bitcoin, and so now all equities and all contracts are now written on Bitcoin. So literally everything is done on either Bitcoin, some side chain of Bitcoin, some layer 2 or layer 3 level solution of Bitcoin. And I'm talking about total win, right? Maybe the price is somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million to capitalize on the entire world's economy. Maybe it's slightly higher. And so we're saying that the probability of that happening, if the price right now is 8 to 10,000, is 1%, or a little bit more than that, depending on where you view that win situation. And I'm not so sure that we're 1% of the way there to really capturing this. And I would say it goes even more so for some of these other coins. Maybe like Ripple, if you would market capitalize all the XRP tokens, almost nobody's actually using XRP. They're using Ripple technology, but not maybe XRP specifically, but its valuation is something in 100 billion if you include all the tokens that are not in circulation as well. And so that probability for me doesn't make much sense. And I really don't see the expected value as positive long term until something radically changes.
Do you think the superficial level of these coins, or not the superficial knowledge, I suppose, of the general consumer of these coins, not diving deep into the tech, is what is causing that concern?
Yes, for sure. I would say that most people are seeing huge price movements and saying, "Oh, I can get rich on this also." And there's a big fear of missing out or FOMO factor that I've definitely seen within my community. I'm in a couple groups of maybe 50 to a couple hundred people on Telegram and WhatsApp, and these are mostly retail investors, and this is sort of what I use to gauge. I've gone so deep that almost everyone I know has heard me talk about crypto forever. It's hard to gauge what the average person who's just getting in thinks, and so I try and use these as good metrics. And most people are saying, "Oh, invest in this coin; it's just gone up," rather than invest in this coin; it actually has some use case. Or maybe, like you might say, in equities, well, it's got some good EBITDA or bad, or etc. And maybe it will be able to have this earnings report or that earnings report. There'll be some way to value the network's growth, or however you want to value these things. People aren't valuing them with any sort of metric so that you can compare it to say that, oh, this is as good as Dash was maybe in mid 2017. This is why it should grow. It's growing because it's growing. And so maybe technical analysis is all good, but I'm not sure you can have sustained growth when everyone's trading off of momentum.
What groups do you recommend that people follow? Maybe like the top 3 groups.
I actually think it's super interesting to watch pump and dump groups. Not that I'm advocating that anyone should actually go into a pump and dump, but to see the type of communication that happens when people are blatantly manipulating the price. And so this is so that people can see that people are cheating and that you're not always the one with the first information. And so there's a good chance that you've never heard a lot about these groups. And if you just search like pump on Telegram, you'll see like 20 or 30 of them. And so you'll see that this is just one example of cases with tons of information that you don't have that other people are trading on. And so if you're just trading on the price movement, you're probably a little bit behind.
Okay. Yeah, very good. Talk to us about the Tether.
Sure. So there's been a scandal or scandalous about Tether Limited and their connection with Bitfinex over maybe since April of 2017. They launched as a cryptocurrency that was supposedly backed by the dollar, and that if you give them $1, they'll give you 1 Tether, or maybe some limited, you have to give them 10,000 for 10,000, or whatever the amount is, and if you give them that amount of Tether back, they'd give you $1. And so they'd act as a centralized peg. So it's backed by Tether Limited instead of maybe backed by the U.S. government. And this is a way to have a public blockchain that still stabilized the price. And so a lot of exchanges saw that as very lucrative. They didn't have to comply with USD laws or any other fiat laws if they were cryptocurrency only, or that was the assumption. And so we saw a huge pop-up of exchanges all over the world that were Tether was the main quote, rather than having USD or another fiat along with maybe Bitcoin. But as long as people didn't want to take Bitcoin exposure, you could start using Tether as your exposure. And if people believed it was back to the dollar, and everyone is, if it's as stable as the dollar, then that should be good. And so in April, they had lost I think it was around April, they had lost their banking relationship. And ever since then, it's been a little bit murky if they even have a banking partner and if they're even storing that money anywhere. But from that time, it's increased from in the order of a couple hundred million to 2.5 billion tethers issued. And there doesn't seem to be any proof that they're backing. If there was, it would be pretty simple for a company to do an audit here, or it would be seemingly simple, but they have not shown any audit, and the one audit that they did engage backed off of them. It's unclear if one of the best audit firms in the country did not have the skills to audit a pretty simple balance sheet audit, but that was the claim that was made. And so when there's tons of smoke, there's a good chance there's fire. And so I'd warn anyone who is using Tether-backed exchanges with that whole Tether to just keep that in mind, that you are taking Tether risk on top of crypto exposure risk.
What do you think it will take to get rid of that smoke for Tether?
A simple balance sheet audit from a reputable firm would definitely do it, right? There are ways to do proof of reserves to say that each one of these, whichever bank that they're using, or how many banks they're using, if they'll publicly say, we'll create some proof of reserves where they create some Merkle tree with everyone's balanced, and individually you might be able to check because they should have all the KYC AML, and so they should know how many I hold or which dollars came from me, or something along the lines where they have some reputable firm audit them. That's one way to clearly check that all the dollars came in before all the tethers were printed and not the other way around. There's speculation and maybe some evidence that Tether printed the tethers, bought Bitcoin, sold it for dollars on maybe GDAX or Gemini or some other fiat exchange, and so the tethers were printed first and then they were backed later, which would be clearly fraud.
Okay. With your background in education, having finished your bachelor's so quickly, what do you think it takes for college-age students, or maybe even high school-age students, to have the knowledge to get into cryptocurrency and blockchain right now, and what's your involvement in that?
Sure. So I currently teach a undergraduate level course in blockchain and the mathematics behind it. We focus not only on cryptocurrencies but other applications, and we don't touch too much on the trading perspective and try more focus on the game theoretics and mathematics that secures blockchain. For people that want to get in, there are tons of resources that have recently popped up over the last year that make it much easier for someone joining now to start. Andreas has published his book online for free, or you can buy it and support him. And he has tons of videos online. He's a great educator. 3 Brown, 1 Blue, a YouTube site, just announced maybe 3 or 4 months ago a video on how blockchain works, and it's super intuitive, in my opinion, and tries to break away from the heavy math that's involved and a little bit of hand wavy, but it allows you to get the main idea before you jump deep. And the Princeton Bitcoin book is probably the most famous book here for educators that dives the complete history of Bitcoin up to like 2012. So you're missing SegWit and Lightning Network and a lot of the newer advancements. But if you want to catch up till 2012, 2013, which is most of the development of Bitcoin, that book is phenomenal.
Excellent. I know that with the cryptocurrency space, it's moving so rapidly, and it's usually the questions are involved around what's going to happen in the next quarter, what's going to happen in the next year or so. For the students that you have, the college students that you have, where do you see them integrating this technology into their life in maybe 10 or 15 years?
It might be even too hard to say, maybe similar to the internet in the late 90s, that nobody could have imagined that we would need a social network or a search engine. And there were tons of people who said that the internet was more or less useless or would not nearly have been as integrated as it is today. It may be that the applications of tomorrow are not today's applications like Uber, Airbnb, StubHub on a blockchain, but things we can't even imagine. The obvious solutions is to sort of like we internalized everything and then equitized everything, we can tokenize everything. And so everything will now become a token and everything will have a market economics. So you might actually have Uber have a token. And, you may even have the reviews on the blockchain and you pay a different amount for different review systems. You might have banks go away. I see that as unlikely for how much power and control and how innovative some of these banks have been over the last couple of years. I don't think banks are stupid, nor are they not watching this. But theoretically, some parts of this, as fintech spaces change rapidly and will continue to change rapidly, we might see blockchain technology or decentralized, cryptographically secure data structures really take over. There's no saying that blockchain will be the solution. It may even be DAGs or parallel blockchains or some other topology that we can't even imagine. It's unclear that blockchains are the solution. From Hebrew U, they posted some mixture where you had some DAGs and some chains, and that's picking up a lot of research recently. So just knowing that this exists, it will be helpful, I think, over the next revolution, maybe in the next 10 years as this really gains mass adoption.
Okay. What other projects are you involved in right now?
So at Hercules Tech, we analyze data for cryptocurrencies and try and find valuable metrics so that people can analyze cryptocurrencies effectively. We do prop trading, I guess, put your money where your mouth is, and look at the best ways to maybe capitalize on some of the inefficiencies in the market. We talked about some of that information asymmetry before, and so we're looking at different data sets that exist about the market and trying to figure out what are how would quant firms, maybe in equities, use this data, and what data set is relevant, and how do you clean data specifically for crypto that may be a little bit different, as there's no fundamental balance sheet that gets released every quarter. Rather, you have to infer some of these things, and some things nobody knows how to value. The NVT ratio is like the PE ratio blockchain, but we're not sure if that even works, and it might take years before we get something realistic, but we're trying that.
Okay. And what kind of consumer do you see yourself involved with?
Our customers would mostly be hedge funds and quant traders and systematic traders. I would say we are not ideally looking at retail customers in the short term, mostly trying to help onboard either existing equities funds or other brand new funds that are getting into the space. And then maybe down the line, as we normalize our products and figure out how to generalize a lot of the stuff, we may go retail as well. Okay,
very good. Any final thoughts before we wrap up today?
No, I guess be careful in crypto land, and it's a volatile world with a lot of opportunity.
Kenneth, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank everyone for joining us here on the Future Tech Podcast. We'll see you next time.
You have been listening to Almost Here, Around the Corner Future Technology Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Subscribe to this podcast, post a review to discover more future technologies that are poised to transform our lives for better or worse, such as Bitcoin, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.